Hello, everyone. A pleasant day to all of you who are participating in this event. It is such a pleasure to be with you in this virtual conference for some information sharing. Thank you, Budu Luhur International Network for Education, for inviting us in this endeavor. I am here to represent the School of Nutrition and Hospitality Management of the Centro Escolar University in Manila, Philippines. My name is Hani Bontile. I am a registered nutritionist dietitian and the program head of Nutrition and Dietetics. For today, my task is to deliver a message about this very interesting topic on poverty and malnutrition and how alleviating one can benefit the other. Over the years, debates on poverty and its connection with health and nutrition has been going on. Whether poverty leads to ill health or whether poor nutrition is a precursor of poverty. It's basically like the famous chicken or egg paradox. Which really comes first? And although there are several scientific evidences that currently backs up both arguments, the fact remains the same. Poverty and ill health, along with poor nutrition, almost always coexist. So for the purpose of this talk, I will be focusing my presentation on the intertwined link between poverty and malnutrition. Next, I will also discuss the poverty as a cause of malnutrition, as well as its consequence of malnutrition, and relate it in the Philippine context before and amid the COVID-19 pandemic. And lastly, I will be sharing with you some of the goals and plans of the Philippines, including some of the actions that are already underway in order to address this interrelated concern. By definition, poverty is a state or condition in which a person or a community lacks the financial means to attain the minimum standard of living. Poverty is recognized as a multifaceted concept, not just about a lack of income, but also as a matter of insufficient or inappropriate earning capacities in relation to poor health, ignorance, and lack of power and voice. Malnutrition is defined as a group of conditions related to poor quality or inadequate amount of nutrient intake, absorption, or utilization. It encompasses all forms of poor nutrition, whether it is caused by an excess nutrient consumption, which is leading to obesity, or caused by inadequate nutrient intake that leads to wasting and stunting, both of which is very common among those suffering from extreme and prolonged hunger. Now, this figure here shows the characteristics of poverty and how it can greatly contribute to the development of poor health outcomes and to the spread of disease. Poverty undermines the effectiveness of health services and slows down population control. And we also know for a fact that morbidity and disability among the poor and disadvantaged groups leads to a vicious spiral of marginalization, keeping them in a poverty state, and in turn to increased ill health. One of the greatest challenges that the humanity is facing at this time is still about eradicating poverty in all its forms. And while the number of people living in extreme poverty dropped by more than half between the year 1990 and 2015, many are still struggling for the most basic human needs. Now, the Sustainable Development Goals, which we know are the bold commitment in order to finish what has been started in the Millennium Development Goals, and its goal is still to end poverty in all forms and dimensions by year 2030. Poverty is a complex phenomenon which is rooted in an array of factors and conditions, many of which extend beyond the control of the health sector, according to Williamson in 2001. The number of people living in absolute poverty and despair is growing steadily, and improving the health and longevity of the poor has always been a fundamental goal of economic development. But It is also a means to achieving the other developmental goals relating to poverty reduction. Now, this diagram illustrates a two-way link that exists between malnutrition and poverty, creating a vicious cycle with each other. Malnutrition is a universal issue with different forms, and poverty has been accused as the main and principal cause of malnutrition, but at the same time, undernutrition might deepen the influence of poverty and entrap individuals and societies in what is known as the cycle of poverty. Poverty alone does not lead to malnutrition, but it seriously affects the availability of adequate amounts of nutritious food for the most vulnerable populations. Now, the interconnected nature of poverty and malnutrition demonstrates the complexities in identifying major determinants of health as they relate to food security. Without a direct cause or consequence of malnutrition, the development of effective interventions to improve health and nutritional status poses as an even greater challenge. Here, we look at the framework development by the UNICEF. This framework simply demonstrates that the underlying causes of malnutrition are multifaceted, which includes economic, social, and political factors. We can see that poverty is recognized as both a cause and consequence of malnutrition. Poverty reduction is not a feature that can be accomplished by any one person in any one sector because poverty is rooted in many socio-environmental conditions. And we know that it calls for a community-based, multi-sectoral approach, which is similar with malnutrition. We know malnutrition is involved in multiple and interrelated determinants, and a similarly intricate series of multifaceted and multi-sectoral approaches are also required. Poverty as a cause of malnutrition. Income poverty could be brought by unemployment, low wages, lack of education, can lead to household food insecurity, inadequate care, unhealthy household environment, and lack of health services. People of low socioeconomic status are the most vulnerable ones to food insecurity because their purchasing power, or since the purchasing power serves as the main determinant of the ability to afford nutritional food sources. And households that cannot attain these nutritional foods or nutritious foods because of income poverty are the most afflicted or the most associated with inadequate diet and disease that leads to malnutrition. Severe malnutrition can result in many disease-related consequences, and effects on morbidity, mortality, and disability all contribute to increase healthcare cost. Low-income households usually spend the most or the majority of total household income on food. They spend most of their money just for food. And in these cases, even the lowest out-of-the-pocket healthcare service can severely diminish the remaining income to be used for food supply, which further perpetuates the issue of food insecurity. The international poverty line is the monetary threshold under which an individual is considered to be living in poverty. The current international poverty line set by the World Bank using the 2011 purchasing power parity conversion factor is at $1.90 per day. Therefore, households with a per capita income or expenditure less than the standard poverty line are defined as being poor. Living on $1.90 a day might seem impossible in a developed country, but the World Bank estimates that 10% of the world's population, or about 760 million people, face this reality, and these people live in what the World Bank calls extreme poverty. In the Philippines, according to the Asian Development Bank Basic Statistics Report, 16% of the population lived below the national poverty line as of 2018. And there is a proportion of employed population that is below the $1.90 purchasing power parity, and they are falling at 2.7%. And as of 2019, the total unemployment rate is at 2.2%. Alongside the rising concern on income poverty is a disturbing situation where 31.4% of children and a staggering 63.1% of girls and boys in autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao live below the poverty line. And 28 children die before they even reach the age of 5 due to wasting brought about by the lack of food. And the lack of income can have more adverse impacts on them because, unlike adults, children are still in certain developmental stages where proper nourishment is necessary and are most vulnerable to diseases. The International Poverty Line sets the income level as a prime indicator for poverty. However, the conceptualization of poverty should not be limited to average income and wealth, but should also encompass various other deprivations that are often experienced by people living in poverty. In 2010, the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative and the United Nations Development Programme created the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, or the MPI, as an international measure of acute poverty, covering about or over 100 developing countries. And this global MPI highlights the use of multiple indicators to account for various concerns that people experience as a consequence of poverty. This MPI looks beyond income to be able to understand how people experience poverty in multiple and simultaneous ways. It identifies how people are being left behind across 3 key dimensions, including health, education, and standard of living, which comprises about 10 indicators. People who experience deprivation in at least 1/3 of these weighted indicators fall into the category of multidimensionally poor. In the Philippine context, the Philippine Statistics Authority released on November 2018 the Multidimensional Poverty Index based on an initial methodology following the Alkire-Foster method. This MPI serves to complement the income-based measure of poverty. And in this initial methodology, 13 indicators were identified across 4 dimensions, which includes education, health and nutrition, housing, water and sanitation, and lastly, employment. The Philippine National MPI shows that the education dimension had the largest contribution to overall deprivation at 36.5% and 36.9% in 2016 and 2017, followed by the health and nutrition dimension with a contribution of 26.2% in 2016 and 27.5% in 2017. Though hunger had the least incidence, there was a notable increase in incidence of deprivation from 2016 and 2017. At the launch of the Philippine Poverty Assessment Report, the World Bank mentioned that the Philippines can overcome poverty. And the reason for this optimism is that from 2006 to 2015, robust economic growth helped the poverty rate in the Philippines to fall by 5 percentage points. So poverty declined from 26.6% in 2006 to 21.6% in 2015. The contributing factors for this decline in poverty were the expansion of jobs outside agriculture, government transfers in particular to qualified poor families through the Pantawid Pamilya Pilipino program, or the PPP, and the remittances from the overseas Filipino workers. While the Philippines has experienced success in reducing poverty, there are still remaining challenges, and the Philippines need to do more to end poverty. There are still about 22 million poor Filipinos, and these poor families most often live in rural areas with limited access to quality schools, health centers, and safe drinking water, not to mention in need of better roads and transportation that will help them to go to their jobs or bring their produce to the market. Now, what can we do to end the poverty? Extreme hunger and malnutrition remain a huge barrier to development, not just in the Philippines, but also in other countries. The SDGs aim to end all forms of hunger and malnutrition by 2030, making sure that all, especially children, have sufficient and nutritious food all year. And this involves promoting sustainable agricultural, supporting small-scale farmers, and equal access to land, technology, and markets. It also requires international cooperation to ensure investment in infrastructure and technology to improve agricultural productivity. You see, after decades of steady decline, as measured by the prevalence of undernourishment or population below minimum level of dietary energy consumption, the trend in world hunger has slightly reverted. Hunger and malnutrition relate closely with the state of food security. When all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. The definition underscores the multidimensionality of food security, including the interaction between food systems, nutrition, and health. Unfortunately, food security, especially among the poor, has been weakened primarily by restrictive trade policies and low farm productivity and income. The United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization report showed that the Philippines recorded the most number of food insecure people in Southeast Asia in 2017 up to 2019, with 59 million Filipinos suffering from moderate to severe lack of consistent access to food. The number of severe and moderately food insecure Filipinos climbed from 44.9 million as recorded in 2014 to 2016. Many Filipinos suffer from lack of food or poor diets despite the rising food availability. This is because of inadequate access to food due to high poverty and low income, especially among the rural population that are generally engaged in agriculture. Higher food prices exacerbate the situation. While income rises, we know that as income rises or food prices fall, malnutrition declines. However, raising incomes is not a guarantee to ending hunger and malnutrition. Even among those at the top wealth quintile, malnutrition levels of children remain elevated. Food security, as defined by the Food and Agriculture Organization, is a situation that exists where all people have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy lifestyle at all times. It exists in 4 dimensions, which includes food availability, economic and physical access to food, food utilization, and stability over time. The economy of the Philippines is heavily dependent on agriculture. Most of what constitutes food security in the country depends on the agricultural sector. Therefore, challenges faced by Filipino farmers and fishermen often have a detrimental effect on food security in the country. One of the biggest challenges to accessing food in the Philippines is the lack of income due to unemployment. This problem is especially prevalent in the southern island group of Mindanao, where 9 of the 16 poorest provinces lie. On the other hand, proper food utilization ensures that consumed food must have a positive nutritional impact on the people, and people must be informed of storage and hygiene practices, individual health and water sanitation, and feeding and sharing practices. Again, the challenge posed for this aspect of food security in the Philippines is income. In a country with the highest food prices in the region, only those with a sufficient income will be able to afford nutritious food. those with lower incomes will have to settle for something less costly or sometimes with no food at all. Food insecurity leads to hunger, and hunger, when persistent, can lead to undernutrition, illnesses, and lower work productivity later in life. This can have negative effects on the economic productivity of countries. Food insecurity can also be measured through the household's experience of episodes of anxiety over food sources and experience of hunger. Hunger, as we know, is strongly interconnected with poverty, and people living in poverty frequently face household food insecurity, use inappropriate care practices, and live in unsafe environments that have low access to quality water, sanitation and hygiene, and inadequate access or availability to health services and education, all of which contribute to hunger. Over the past years, the Philippines, being located in the middle of the Pacific, has experienced several threats to food security. Food supply has been gravely affected by a string of natural calamities that have rendered farmer crops unusable, while problems caused by the lack of adequate infrastructure have posed an unnecessary and formidable challenge to fears. Now, this COVID-19 pandemic has worsened the food insecurity in the country, given that there has been limited access to food. According to the latest National Mobile Phone Survey, the proportion of families experiencing involuntary hunger, hunger due to lack of food to eat, well, at least once in the past 3 months, reached a new record high of 30.7%, or an estimated 7.6 million households. This is according to the Social Weather Station's survey. The 30.7% hunger rate in September 2020 is a sum of 22%, or an estimated 5.5 million families who experienced moderate hunger, and 8.7%, which is an estimated 2.2 million families who experienced severe hunger. From this slide, we can also see that hunger is always higher from the lowest socioeconomic status. And in this survey, socioeconomic status was proxied by the respondents' educational attainment. This is because during the time when the survey was being done, the phone interviewer was unable to rate the SES of the household visually by the appearance of the dwelling and the neighborhood. The most recent Social Weather Station's national survey, conducted in September 2020, reported that adult joblessness remains very high at 39.5%, though there was a 6-point decline from the record high 45.5% in July 2020. The estimated numbers of jobless adults were 23.7 million in September 2020 and 27.3 million in July 2020. The survey also found that 14% adult Filipinos lost their job during the COVID-19 crisis. This is about 2 out of 5, or 39%, among those with no job or livelihood at the time of the interview, but they had one before. On the other hand, 22% lost their job before the crisis, 12% never had a job before the crisis, and 52% had a job at the time of the survey. The SWS report, or the Social Weather Station's report, also showed that hunger rises sharply among the jobless. Compared to July 2020, the families experiencing involuntary hunger, or hunger due to lack of food to eat at least once in the past 3 months, increased among those with no job or livelihood by 13 points, from 25.4% to 38.3%. Among those who never had a job, it was up by 14 points, from 24.2% to 38.4%. And among those with a job, it was up by 7 points, from 17% to 24%. Poverty as a consequence of malnutrition. Many adults living in low-income countries cannot afford to be sick because healthcare costs are high, transportation costs to health facilities accumulate, and taking days off work means lost productivity and lost wages. Undernutrition is a major underlying cause of illness and disease, and one that contributes to additional healthcare spending. So clearly, malnutrition can deepen the influence of poverty and entraps individuals and societies in the cycle of poverty. While food is important for the nutrition of children, nutrition goes beyond mere feeding programs. Increased vulnerability to diseases due to poor health-seeking behavior, incomplete immunization, poor hygiene and care practices, inadequate diet, both in quantity and quality, causes undernutrition in early childhood. In the Philippines, the immunization coverage between 2013 and 2015 fell sharply from 89 to 60%, and about 33% of children are stunted or short for their age because of malnutrition. Stunting, as we know, has an irreversible damage to nutrition and health. It could also be fatal. Malnutrition has both micro and macro level consequences. Micronutrient deficiencies impair individual cognitive capacity and lower national IQ scores. They weaken individual immune systems and increase national mortality rates, and they hinder individual productivity, lowering national income and inhibiting economic growth. Macroscopically, the long-term consequences of malnutrition are daunting to overall economic and social development. Disruption in education is a factor that contributes to the cycle of poverty, as it leads to restricted income earning potential. We know that many adult men living in low-income countries rely on manual labor to be able to earn an income. However, with reduced lean body mass and symptoms of fatigue could be brought about by iron deficiency, can lead to poor work performance and limited productivity. Iron deficiency has been recognized as a barrier to economic development because it impairs the work performance of innumerable men and women. In some countries, adult iron deficiency contributes to an estimated loss of up to 2% of the national GDP. According to the UNICEF Philippines, the economic impact of malnutrition is equivalent to $4.5 billion a year, or 3% of GDP annually. And these amounts represent healthcare costs, as well as lost productivity and lost opportunities of the country's future workforce. The country loses $220 billion per year, or about 1.5% of GDP, because of malnutrition. And stunting alone contributes to more than 50% of the economic costs of undernutrition. Based on the latest National Nutrition Survey conducted by the Food and Nutrition Research Institute, 5.8% Filipino under 5 children are wasted or thin for height, 28.8% are stunted or short for age. Many Filipino children are also suffering from micronutrient deficiencies, also known as hidden hunger, particularly in vitamin A deficiency, iron deficiency, zinc, and iodine. Many Filipinos, both young and adults, experience overweight and obesity. And of the identified overweight and obese groups, 2.9% are under 5 years old, 8% are between 5 to 10 years old, 9.8% are adolescents, and 36% are adults. Every day, 95% in the Philippines die from malnutrition, and about 29,000 under 5 children die every year due to undernutrition. The number of malnourished children is increasing because of poverty, neglect, and stigma. A third of Filipino children are stunted or short for their age. Stunting after 2 years of age can be permanent, irreversible, and even fatal. And with the pandemic, malnutrition among Filipino children has even worsened. The COVID-19 pandemic did not only create a situation that pose challenges to the implementation of nutrition programs for severely malnourished children, the operations of health centers have also been disrupted, and worse, it has resulted to the inability of families to meet their basic food requirements due to income losses. The situation of these children and their families is further aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic, as they have to stay in the cramped spaces where there is limited access to water, clean toilets, and hygiene facilities, and making it difficult to comply with health protocols of frequent hand washing and physical distancing. With the consequences of malnutrition leading to poverty, the Philippines aim to end all forms of malnutrition and to protect the first 1,000 days of a child, as it is a critical period for growth and development years. Ending hunger and preventing malnutrition will not only protect child from stunting and its irreversible consequences, but it can also prevent the future of this generation, from having an impaired cognitive development because the brain did not receive proper nourishment. Combating malnutrition will not only create healthy individuals, good nutrition also provides a positive impact in the country's economy by making its Filipino children, the future generation, 10 times more likely to overcome diseases, complete their education, be a healthier adult, and have a healthier families, and have the capability to earn more as adults. Thus, the Philippines shall remain committed in adopting the Global 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, anchored with the goals of the Philippine Development Plan, and working together with the Scaling Up Nutrition Networks. This is by ensuring that all people, especially the poor and those in vulnerable situations, can have access to nutritious and sufficient food and achieve better nutrition. The Philippine Plan of Action for Nutrition, otherwise known as the PPAN, is a country's framework of action for nutrition improvement. And in order to achieve target outcomes, a mix of nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive programs will be implemented together with those that will create an enabling environment. Note that there is a set of what we call the nutrition supportive programs that include immunization, food and agriculture system programs, and projects that impact on food supply, conditional cash transfer, and health insurance. These programs are not included in the PPAN 2017-2022 because these programs were not designed to contribute directly to nutritional outcomes. The PPAN will address nutrition-specific programs that address the immediate causes of malnutrition, specifically inadequate food and poor nutrient quality, poor maternal and child caring practices. Complementing these nutrition-specific interventions are nutrition-sensitive projects. Now, these are the development projects that were tweaked to produce nutritional outcomes. Tweaking can be done by targeting households with undernourished children or nutritionally vulnerable groups, or targeting areas with high levels of malnutrition, or being a channel for delivering nutrition-specific interventions. The nutrition-sensitive programs will include infant and young child feeding, integrated management of acute malnutrition, national dietary supplementation program, micronutrient supplementation of vitamin A, iron, folic acid, multiple micronutrient powder with zinc, and the implementation of a mandatory food fortification, particularly rice with iron, flour with vitamin A and iron, sugar and cooking oil with vitamin A, and salt with iodine. For PPAN 2017 and 2022, these are the initially identified specific programs that will be tweaked to contribute more directly to nutritional outcomes. These nutrition-sensitive programs are in coordination with other government agencies, and other or additional programs or projects can be identified along the way. On January 2020, President Duterte signed Executive Order 101, creating an interagency task force on zero hunger, recognizing that involuntary hunger, food security, undernutrition, and child wasting, stunting, and mortality continue to be a serious concern in the country. The task force will be assigned in various government agencies to formulate a national food policy which will outline national priorities based on a comprehensive understanding of the problem of hunger and related issues, and will provide a roadmap for achieving zero hunger, taking into consideration existing laws and issuances, as well as international law and treaty obligations. As a contribution to the Zero Hunger Task Force, the Department of Health, through its arm agency, the National Nutrition Council, will further focus on the first 1,000 days of a child to strategically prevent new cases of stunting while addressing all cases of wasting among under 5. The National Nutrition Council will also focus on the key priority nutrition interventions and human development and poverty reduction cluster priority provinces. We'll also focus on developing enabling mechanisms such as formulation of relevant policies and orders, capacity building of various stakeholders, and research activities shall be intensified. Another thing is that in partnership with various groups and networks, the National Nutrition Council will also establish a strengthened partnerships with the scaling up nutrition networks, such as the civil society, business network, the academe network, donors, and also development partners. In this sense, I would like to end my talk and leave you with a message saying nutrition is an excellent investment. Improved nutrition empowers people and it empowers communities. In doing so, it fuels the development process and leads to poverty reduction. Improved nutrition is central to improved income generation, poverty reduction, and more rapid development. Empowered and well-nourished individuals, as well as communities, are also less likely to be drawn into conflict with all its tragic consequences. So, I hope that this presentation gave us some light. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great day.